This is the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, sitting in its Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Human Trafficking and Child Sex Abuse. Presiding is myself, Chief Justice Walsh Branner, and also Justice Cleverly. We're hearing from Neelu Berry. Can you read the oath out, Neelu?
I, Neelu Berry, solemnly affirm by all that is sacred and righteous that my testimony is given freely and without coercion, and is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Neelu. I should also mention that we have with us His Grace Bishop Ria from Jerusalem and Corinne Hutzebar from Belgium. And after you've given your testimony, which will be recorded, there may be some questions we have to get some specifics from you. So if you could, as Sasha indicated, tell us what you would like to present to the tribunal in a chronological way, if you can.
Yes, thank you. I qualified as a pharmacist in London School of Pharmacy and in 1983, and I had cancer in 1997 for 3-4 years, and in that time my sister fell pregnant and was told to abort her baby January 2000, and she and her husband decided to go ahead with the pregnancy because they said there was a diaphragmatic hernia and the baby would not survive the pregnancy. The parents chose to allow the baby to die naturally. They said she would not go full term or survive the birth or survive the operation for the hernia. He proved the doctors wrong on all counts. She was discharged home at 2 months. At 4 months, she had both her lungs were the same size. The stomach she had the operation, at 2 weeks old. They pulled the stomach back from the left lung area into the abdomen. And so the stomach and lungs that were premature were now at 4 months were normal, same size. She had required oxygen, which was expensive. So they'd asked my sister to wash the disposable syringes. So then they gave an overdose of ranitidine. Because I had cancer, I was having chemotherapy, I didn't realize the seriousness of the drug overdose until after her death. So after her death, I did the research and I did reports. I did 2 expert reports into the overdoses. I had given names of doctors, pharmacists, nurses to the professional bodies to look into these pharmacists who gave an adult dose of a drug to my niece that landed her in hospital on the 1st of October 2000. And they are supposed to review the drug overdose on admission. They continued the drug overdose on admission. They continued it even on the 5th day when the Guy's Poisons unit informed them that they must stop it. They carried it on. So she went purple. By the 5th day, she was purple, and my sister was trying to connect the oxygen, and the doctors were disconnecting the oxygen. So that's when my sister telephoned me, and I went, and I could see she was purple. She was mottled, this baby, 5-month-old baby now. And by the 20th of October, I went up to the doctor and I said, "Are you trying to kill this baby?" Well, he smiled, and within 45 minutes, they got a fax from the National Children's Hospital in London to the effect that the parents must have nothing to do with the baby. They got a child protection order. They removed my sister from her baby's cubicle. They prevented me from seeing my niece in the last 6 days of her life. My sister found the baby with semen in her mouth on the day before her death. And then the baby's body was mutilated before and after death. Then I did the research into the hospital and found it had the highest death rate of babies in the country, 124%. And after we blew the whistle, and then they removed all the organs without consent, a brain, eyeballs. We found the eyeballs had cotton wool balls in the eye sockets at the mortuary. So despite the professional bodies being aware of the horrific circumstances, despite there being organ scandals leaked out in January 2001, despite the professional bodies being on notice, the persecution and state terrorism against me and my family started. I was investigated by my professional body for bringing the profession into disrepute. I was struck off in 2009. And I appealed that, and I was threatened with £100,000 cost. My sister and I went outside the hospital to warn other family members about this high death rate. The maternity was shut down in that hospital because of the high death rates. But we did not get any credit. We got persecuted for all that. The death rate in the hospital dropped to 94%. It dropped by 30%. And this hospital had 5 times the national death rate for Asian mothers giving birth there. There were so many scandals. There was a Bristol baby scandal where they had found that these babies had been operated on by doctors who did not have the experience. So they were using babies for secret training. And there was the Shipman scandal that they hit. There have been over 500 reports of deaths of elderly women where their wills had been tampered with. There was a Royal Liverpool inquiry into the unlawful removal and retention of organs in the UK. And so all these scandals, and then my council, London Borough of Redbridge, did a false prosecution on the parents of the baby. They were accused of not having a license. They were struggling with finances. They were letting rooms in their home, a 3-bedroom townhouse. They were prosecuted and fined £20,000, £21,000 in a complete fraudulent prosecution. Then I became aware of 2 siblings in London who were making allegations that the 7 and 8-year-olds were being made to cut little babies' throats and take the eyeballs out. So when I saw that about 4 or 5 times, I thought there's something in it, because they were talking about these babies being raped. And my sister had smelt semen in my niece's mouth. So I realized there was something going on in the National Health Service where they were having access to patients in the hospitals for rituals, in the same way that these children are described were taking place in their primary schools, because these children described they were being raped as well. And the children in the primary school were being mass prostituted by their parents. So I was basically kidnapped several times, locked up in a cell and put in a jail. I was put through 2 trials. These witnesses said I was inside the church and I disrupted a church service. The police body cams had video evidence that I was outside. The police falsely prosecuted me the second time for a 6-day trial, which ended before half time, but they put a restraining order on me. And they've used this restraining order to try to kidnap me recently, 2 weeks ago. Now that restraining order was issued whilst the jury was sent home under the pretense that they would start on Monday, the 18th of July 2016. On Monday morning when the jury returned, the judge then told them, after he sent them home on Friday, he decided that he wasn't going to carry on with the trial and he was going to just do a restraining order all by himself. Well, he was in contempt of the jury. But the police have now falsely enforced that restraining order on another child right campaigner, Sabine McNeil, who has been in remand in a prison since February. She was my co-defendant. They had added her to my second false prosecution. And the only reason why that trial collapsed was because there were 36 child right supporters, campaigners outside the church. And one of them was inside the church, and she had an audio recording that proved that there was no disruption of the church service. The police and the CCTVs on the street, the police concealed it from the jury, so the police were in contempt. And so we have another case now that now they use that restraining order on any of those, anybody on the planet has now got that restraining order, and they're enforcing it on people who supported me and Sabine at this fraud trial, witness intimidation trial fraud. So that's a situation really with the state terrorism that my family and I have been subjected to, because I'm a professional witness and I'm qualified, and my evidence has been covered up, criminally covered up by the police, by the courts, and by Parliament. And Sabine McNeil has evidence because she went to the EU Parliament, and they have a report, if I recall, it's report EU 2011-92, in which the EU has asked the UK to look into its child sex slavery, child trafficking for the sex industry. And we've had some criminal convictions in the UK, many criminal convictions of police officers, but they never look at the children, they never identify the children, they never rescue, rehabilitate, or return the children back to parents, because they don't want the witness evidence of these children to come out. So this is a situation, is that the whole state terrorism against whistleblowers is the biggest problem we have. So recently, on the 20th of July, I was subjected to my theft of my home. I was living in a home. I'm now homeless because on the 20th of July, 2018, 22 men and women dressed as police raided my home and broke my door and basically threw me out. So I've had these raids in my home from the false prosecutions, and the local council has sold my data to bailiff companies on fraudulent parking fines, and they've stolen my son's car, and they've stolen my car, and they've stolen my friend's vehicles, they've smashed up my son's motorbike, and it's just sheer terrorism. So I would like to basically plead to the international courts to look at these issues, whereby I'm not the only one that's had their home stolen and they're made homeless. Most whistleblowers I know, they go through this ruined fraud. So we have an equity lawyer, Mr. Edward William Ellis, who
Yes.
used my home as a London office. So he was there on the 20th of July and he served them with contempt notices. And they're now falsely prosecuting me in some Crown courts. I need protection from state terrorism. I need the state to stop the sale of my house. I've asked my counsellor, Gurdial Bamra, he used to be a sergeant for the Metropolitan Police. He then became a councillor. He then became the mayor of Redbridge. Every time I've been to him to assist me, and my MP, Linda Perham, Lee Scott, and now Wes Streeting, things got worse for me and my family. They injected my sister with cancer in 2012. This is baby's mother. She's stage 3 breast cancer. They are injecting MRSA routinely to whistleblowers in the UK. And today's her birthday and my sister's baby's 18th anniversary of her baby's death today. They murdered her baby on her birthday, on the mother's birthday. The baby was born on my birthday, which was 25th of May. They murdered her on 26th of October, 2000. So I think this is a divine mission. I think there's a lot of child trafficking going on, baby trafficking going on, whereby the priests are sent out all over the world into churches, all over the world. These priests are raping young girls in orphanages. These priests have fathered 500 or 1,000 children, such as there's a Brendan Smythe, and priest who did have that many children in the UK. And these other ones that travel around all over the world, all they're doing is making lots of babies from the rapes of little girls. And that's why they go into orphanages, because they don't have a mother and they don't have a father. So the trafficking of orphans is a big problem. In India alone, they have 10,000 orphanages in Kerala. And these babies come from all over India and they're trafficked from Kerala. So what I would urge some international court to look at is take the facts of the case of the 2 children in London, extrapolate it to what's going on all around the world, and then protect the whistleblowers, protect these babies and children, and look at the whole global trafficking of these babies through these churches and these orphanages. And I'm happy to be an advisor on the panel, because I'm, as a professional advisor, I like to call myself a remedy consultant. And I've provided my case to there is a mass remedy process going on in the UK through the equity lawyer who was running the London office from my home. And that was the other reason why they they had to shut the work down. But we haven't stopped, we carry on. I get the stamping done. He produces the evidence of about 200 cases. We have, the citizens' cases of the proof sets we have, and they all get sent to the Royal Commission. And we've come to that conclusion now that basically there's corruption in the states, in the law courts and the Parliament, and that they have an unfitness test now. They must provide mass remedies or basically step down. And so this process really needs to provide the mass remedies for the babies and children. And I'm open to questions now. I think that's generally a snapshot.
Thank you. I'm sure that there'll be a number of questions. I just want to ask you 2 preliminary questions before I call on Justice Cleverly and the others. You said you were struck off by your professional body for unprofessional conduct. What was the nature of the alleged unprofessional conduct?
My sister and I had collected 12,000 signatures of members of the public outside the hospitals.
Yes.
For a new investigation, a proper full investigation into a death after her inquest was a criminal cover-up. And we had banners, and we had leaflets. So they accused me of bringing the profession into disrepute by being with my sister, my younger sister. And because I'd made allegations against these other professionals, they didn't want to deal with those allegations. It was easier for them to go into the infringement committee. This is the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain. Do it on paper and switch the defendants around. The complainant became the defendant, and disrepute became what I was being charged with.
Yes, I can understand that that people who expose evil were often punished. There's a gentleman who's not a lawyer. There's a journalist in Australia who published the list of judges who were paedophiles. So instead of charging the judges, they locked the journalist up for contempt of court. So now you said you were prosecuted. So the prosecution, criminal prosecution, centred on basically what you were doing in relation to calling for an inquiry and prosecutions against others. Is that would that be a fair summary?
Well, I just stood outside a church because a judge had made a judgment that the children were made to lie. And I had photographic and video and direct evidence that those children were telling the truth. I mean, this was not fantasy. This was not anything that children can make up. And I'd seen it with my own eyes, you see. I've got all the evidence. So I think judgment was wrong. And I'd gone into the medical file of these children, and they had reflex anal dilatation. The two siblings, and the chances of that was both of them having it, proved that they'd been abused.
Yes. No, I appreciate that, and my experience is that generally young children tell the truth because they don't know how to cover it up. So I'd ask Justice Cleverly if he would like to follow with some further questions.
Thank you very much, Sir John. Neelu, just a few questions, and mainly to enable further clarity, although your evidence was very clear, and we, I'm sure, very much appreciate that, so thank you for that clarity. But just a couple of questions. You referred to the hospital. What was the name of the hospital again? I think we lost you there.
King George Hospital.
Thank you.
Barking, Havering and Redbridge NHS Trust.
If you get a bit closer to your microphone so we can definitely pick you up on all this stuff. And what did you say was the mortality rate again?
124%, which means that if 100 patients go in expecting to die, another 24% die on top of that.
Okay, so that's the explanation. Thanks for that clarity, because otherwise it sounds a bit odd when 124% of people die. But that's very good. Thank you for that.
And St Bartholomew's at the time was 60%, so there were 40% they could have saved on top of that they didn't save.
And you feel that there was a particularly, that you referred particularly to the effects upon Asian women. Could you just give me some more clarity in relation to that as well?
Yes, I think they were targeting Asian mothers because Asian people don't generally complain when there's a death. They just think, well, that's, they just believe in reincarnation and just think that's the time, and they've just reincarnated and they accept it. So I think it was, I come from a family where my dad was offered a job of a judge in India, in Punjab, in the mid-60s, and he turned it down because all his friends who were judges were being shot dead for not following orders. So he came to England from Punjab in India, thinking this was the most, safest place to be in. So I have acquired my dad's way of thinking, and he did not want to let this go. It cost him hundreds of thousands of pounds in court fees and transcription fees. And I have most of the transcripts where I've gone and acted in person to try to get this most of the time. So I'm happy to share my transcripts to the
Very
world.
good. That was going to be one of my further questions. So you referred to an Edward William Ellis. What for the purposes of those not in this room or in these other rooms, for the purposes of the general audience, can you just give me some idea of, and them an idea of what you mean by an equity lawyer?
Well, he's from apparently there used to be 6,000 equity lawyers in the UK, and now there's only, I think, only 60 left, and he's the youngest. So they got rid of equity law in the the universities, the law universities. And they brought these other laws that they're not honourable, and there's no integrity in these laws. So the equity law was more like the language. I've got the documents I can share with you of all these cases.
I think what would be quite kind of interesting, and maybe turn out to be very important indeed, would be perhaps if Edward William Ellis could at some point also be interviewed and give some testimony with the paperwork and take us through it.
Well, he's a bit camera shy. He's here actually at the moment.
It's okay. We can do it later. We don't have to pull him in. We can have a chat and see how. Otherwise, we could just have the paperwork all delivered here. We can read it at our leisure. But sometimes it's very good if we got somebody who can take us through it.
I did ask him, but I'll ask him again if you like.
No, that'd be very kind. Very good. Thanks, Neelu. Those were just my questions for now, and I'm sure Sir John will now take you on to the Bishop.
Right. Bishop Ria, would you like to follow on with any questions that you may have?
Just one question that comes to mind. What church denomination did Neelu refer to? Is it a church with a hierarchy? Was she able to reach those in high position in that church?
Yeah, this is a church that has been in the social media since August 2014. The mother was driven out of the country. Sabine McNeil was driven out of the country because of the police raids. The boyfriend of the mother also left the country. So there was just Belinda Mackenzie was dealing with it, and myself in the other people's absence. And then we were terrorized by the police. So this case, I'm not allowed to mention the name of the church because of the fear of this restraining order. But I can't even mention, where in London it is. All I can say is in northwest London. And everybody does know that this is a structure that goes back all the way. I believe it's an Anglican church, but it's a common structure, and it takes it every church. It doesn't matter what you call it. They have tried to make it as if they are all different, but they're actually all the same. They all have this part of these priests that travel around the world, and they have access to children in orphanages, or in the UK, these children have described a primary school that's being used for these purposes.
Yes, I follow.
But in the Anglican Church, one may appeal to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. He did act on a cover-up in England, and we have another case today, another cover-up in the Middle East. He did take action, and my question, whether you were able to even send a note.
So Neelu, on behalf of our wonderful commissioner here, What's About, who is having some audio challenges today, yes, in your wonderful testimony, we thank you again. what she was asking, is there someone in your environment that was involved in the military?
I don't believe so, no. I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps Commissioner Hutzabout has a follow-up to that? Yes, she does. She is saying that this is organized all over the world by the Vatican. This has not been possible otherwise, is the statement.
I agree fully. It's a global organized crime network that's using babies and children as training exercises for crimes against humanity, serious tortures, to create a race of psychopaths who are lacking human qualities such as love, compassion, forgiveness, gratitude, and are promoted on the basis of their ability to commit these crimes.
And Commissioner also commented here that, you know, they've had a great amount of time, yes, to implant these Satanist systems, I mean, for centuries, but we can beat them.
It started in 1642 to 1649, where they set up the shipping companies. It was an act for the propagation and promotion of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That was 1649 for the setting up of the New England Company. They had similar acts for the East India, East Africa, East China, and Dutch and French companies. So these are the ones that set up these churches. They pretended that they needed these children in residential schools. But as we know from Canada, there were 40% higher death rates for the North American Indian children in these residential schools. The same thing happens in India and Africa and China. So these structures have been there for good and almost 400 years. That's what we're dealing with. And the corporate structure has been born through the pirate shipping companies, and they all rely on counterfeit currency. I call them treasonous criminals, and they're violating their oath to God to maintain God's laws, to serve and protect God's children. So each public servant that wears a uniform, that thinks that that uniform is going to protect them, but they're not prepared to provide their name, their full name and address, and 2 or 3 forms of ID when they address a member of the public, then they have personal liability, unless they give the names of their managers in a hierarchy all the way up. Where they don't disclose, the person who does not do disclosure above them, that is the person who gets charged with treason, which is still punishable by hanging under the Treason Act, 1776.
Thank you, Neelu, for your incredible testimony. Commissioner still has one more remark that has just come through, and she says we need to put the blame where it belongs. The system has infiltrated our mind with the idea of being guilty, in all caps, of crimes of others. Yes. Mm.
Yes, that is it. That is the point, that people believe they're just doing a job. They're just following orders. But there is no love, compassion, forgiveness, gratitude in the corporate structure, because it's based on profit. But where a pirate currency is based on profit, well, that's treason in itself, because how do you serve and protect a human being whilst you're really interested in the profit? And the oath to God was our divinity, because God, it says we are God's children, and we cannot, and serving is done by a mother and protection is done by a father. So a public servant can only come in our face if they're going to be our mum and dad. And if they don't have any love, compassion, forgiveness, gratitude, because they're after profit, then they're just impersonating a public service. They're embezzling public money. They're abusing their power and office, and they're guilty of treason.
And she follows up to you also, not only profit, the people working in the system is chosen by that system. And that is not difficult because each baby born is followed up by them and their system. Yes.
So these children are groomed from an early age to see their talents. So they'll be going into acting, dramas, entertainment, politicians. They all have their handlers, and they have so many children to choose from. So they've got this entire structure from these backdoor, entrance with fake qualifications, fake names, fake badges. I mean, the guy who stole my house was wearing a badge of Sergeant Bertie. Well, when he arrested me accusing me of disrupting a church service, he was wearing a badge Constable Roberts. Same guy.
Yes. Same guy, yes. Multiple personalities. But I appreciate what you say in relation to what you might call the organisational fix of everything, and to the role of money behind it. I've always been of the belief that no revolution that has succeeded was caused by ordinary working class people who suddenly decided to revolt. It's generally engineered by what I would call middle class merchants, like the French Revolution, who organised to get the people out on the streets. It's interesting how, when wrongdoers are caught out, how they could shift the blame onto someone else. I'm in Australia at the present time, and there's just been a Royal Commission into banking practices and banking fraud, and the commissioner, who's a retired judge, and he has gone through all the banks and discovered that all the banks have been involved in fraud. So what they did was, the chief executive still kept his $5 million salary, and they sacked 200 junior executives who'd carried out the frauds, but the people at the top who engineered it are still there. So, that's as bad as it gets, and particularly with what you might call sex abuse. So I mentioned the journalist who was sent to prison for revealing the names of judges who were corrupt, and it does happen. I really appreciate what you've said. I'll just ask if Justice Cleverly has got any follow-up questions before we conclude. Over to you, Justice.
I'm very much obliged for the testimony that's been given. I think there's some very interesting detail that's been alluded to. It would be nice to get a bit more of that detail and go through that evidence that clearly exists, and be able to say that we as a tribunal can start to begin to weigh it up. I think that it opens some very interesting questions as to the connection between different state organs, the origination of those state organs, and also their purpose and potential remedy for dealing with them in the future. Clearly, we will always need a health system. Clearly, we need an education system. Clearly, we need a system of justice. The issues here seem to be ones around centralisation, and that the central bodies that control them are doing so for their own purposes and not for the purposes of those that they've been created for.